As we announced, we have an interview with Mr. David Phillips, and I believe he is on the line. Can you hear us, Mr. Phillips?
Yes, I can.
Thank you for joining us. It's truly a great honor to have you join us and discuss issues which very, very much relate to Armenian and Armenian questions. When you served as the chairman of TARC, the Turkish-Armenian Reconciliation Committee, and if you do recall, you were our guest some 12 years ago. At the time, you were criticized as someone who did not acknowledge the Armenian genocide. My first question to you is, can you discuss what were your perceptions of Turkish-Armenian issues before 2001 and how they have evolved?
I always identify strongly with the victim, and clearly 1.5 million Armenians who were the victims of genocide were victims in Ottoman Turkey. Because I was in a role as chair of the TARC, we needed to get an independent legal analysis to determine whether or not the events in the early 20th century met the definition of genocide. That's exactly what we did. We sought an independent legal opinion. It defined the crime of genocide and concluded that what happened to the Armenians met the criteria. So journalists, scholars, and others, including politicians, would be justified in using the term genocide to describe the events. From that point onward, I've always used the term genocide, did that day and still do today.
The falsehoods that Turkey is a secular democracy, and you clearly stated in front of all these respected congressmen and senators that Turkey is not secular nor democratic. How can you capsule your thoughts about the hearing, about your book, and what's happening around us in the Middle East?
Well, my opening statement to the committee had two elements. The U.S.-Turkey relationship is based on two false premises. The first is that Turkey is a secular democracy. Turkey is neither secular nor democratic. The second falsehood concerns Turkey's invaluable relationship in NATO. NATO is more than a security alliance. It's a coalition of countries with shared values. Because Turkey under Tayyip Erdogan is Islamist, anti-democratic, hostile to human rights, and anti-American, if NATO were being formed today, Turkey simply wouldn't qualify as a member.
And what do you think of Erdogan being elected as president and running a dictatorship until 2029?
First, we should be clear that he's already running a dictatorship. Regardless of what happens with the upcoming referendum on constitutional changes establishing an executive presidency, Turkey already is a de facto dictatorship with Erdogan at the helm. If Turks approve the referendum on April 16th, then Turkey's aspirations to join the EU would be killed, and Turkey's relationship with the West more broadly in jeopardy. The European Parliament has already voted to suspend negotiations because of the excessive post-coup crackdown and war crimes that have been committed against Kurds in the southeast. So the referendum is a defining moment, but we should acknowledge that Turkey today under Erdogan is already run, not as an authoritarian state, but as a dictatorship.
In your book, Turkey, the Uncertain Ally, you discuss Kurdish question in depth. You just mentioned the southeast. What do you foresee a future of Kurdistan in the new maps that will be drawn? I think there will be a map redrawn of the whole area. What do you think Kurdistan will get?
Well, firstly, Iraqi Kurdistan will become the next newest nation. It will negotiate with Baghdad a friendly divorce. The U.S. will support its separation. Even Turkey will support it because Turkish interests and the interests of Iraqi Kurdistan, by virtue of energy, trade, and transport, have been commingled. The Kurds in Syria will also achieve a de facto self-rule. They already have accomplished that in Rojava, which encompasses contiguous territories in Kobani, Jazeera, and Afrin provinces. We know that the Syrian civil war is going to end with a new constitutional arrangement preserving Syria's sovereignty but devolving dramatically powers to the regions. As Iraqi Kurdistan stands up as a new country and Rojava emerges with self-rule, that's going to put pressure on Iran to further establish genuine autonomy for Iranian Kurdistan. And North Kurdistan, the territories in Turkey, are going to look across its borders, see what their Kurdish brethren have achieved. It was always understood that the Kurdish problem in Turkey could be solved through Turkey's greater integration into Euro-Atlantic structures. But with their EU ambitions now suspended, there's a serious question that the Kurds have to ask themselves. Can they achieve political and cultural rights in a dictatorship under Erdogan, or are they going to press for independence? Marty Adasari, who I interviewed for my book on Kosovo, said that he knew when he embarked on the negotiations that Kosovo would become independent because Serbia had lost its legitimate right to rule by virtue of a pattern of egregious human rights abuse. I think the same can be said for the situation of Kurds in Turkey.
How does this relate to Armenian-Turkish relationship? How are these developments affect that relation? What can we do as Armenians in our relationship with Turkey?
One of the important recommendations that the TARC made concerned opening the Turkish-Armenian border to normal travel and trade, establishing normal bilateral relations, strengthening interaction of civil society. The first two were embodied in the protocols of 2009. We all know, however, that those protocols were never submitted by Erdogan to the parliament for ratification, but nor has either side withdrawn them. The bright side concerns civil society in Turkey and Armenia. When I started our Track 2 activities, there was almost no contact between Turks and Armenians. Now that civil society contact, communication, cooperation is fairly routine. So I think that individuals, people-to-people activities, can continue and expand. When we talk about Turkey-Armenia relations at an official level, it's hard to imagine rapprochement or progress with a government in Ankara which defines reconciliation as subordinating and humiliating the Armenian nation. So I don't see much progress on the governmental side, but I do have hope that there are Turks and Armenians who can continue to work together.
There's Armin Panosyan sitting next to me. He's a student and has a question for you, sir.
Hello, Mr. Phillips. In your writings about the 2009 protocols, you wrote about how there was a certain pan-Turkist sentiment in Turkey that in Azerbaijan that interfered with the protocols, as I think you put it, that Azerbaijan thought that a settlement to the Nagorno-Karabakh issue was not a precondition to the 2009 protocols. What do you think are the most likely terms for a settlement of the Nagorno-Karabakh issue for both sides?
Well, let me just state clearly and for the record that the protocols made no mention of Nagorno-Karabakh or Azerbaijan. There was no linkage, either in the protocols or any of the annexes. The procedural breakthrough in the diplomacy was separating Turkish-Armenian issues from the broader regional context. It was when Erdogan realized that this was the case that he ran to Baku and addressed the Grand National Assembly and said there would be no normalization with Armenia until every inch of Azeri territory was returned. So that was a huge betrayal to the agreement, totally inconsistent with the mediation that had gone on up to that point. What do I see going forward? We have the Minsk Group. The Minsk Group hasn't been effective in resolving the conflict, but it has managed the conflict. There are some wrong proposals to try to expand the Minsk Group to give Turkey a greater role. This would be a fool's errand. Turkey is not an objective party to the conflict. It is directly involved. And the last escalation of violence, we saw Turkish presence on the ground and Turkish diplomacy supporting Azerbaijan's aggression. So going forward, the U.S. needs to play a more proactive role, working cooperatively with other Minsk Group partners. We shouldn't invite the wolf into the chicken coop, which would mean inviting Turkey to become a co-chair or play an expanded role. That would merely fuel violent conflict, not help resolve it.
Can you discuss, sir, the hearings, the subcommittee hearings of April the 5th? What was your take?
There were press reports about the hearings summarizing statements by Chairman Rohrabacher and other members of the Congress. And every member of Congress was uniformly critical of Erdogan's administration. They warned of the risk to U.S.-Turkey relations if Turkish voters supported the referendum. In fact, there was an article in Al Monitor that afternoon warning of a major rupture in U.S.-Turkey relations. The panel included persons with a cross-section of backgrounds. There was a gentleman from the Turkish Heritage Foundation who was a pure propagandist for the Erdogan regime. And I'm going to be investigating his sources of financing to see if he is actually taking money from sources in Turkey that are official. If that is the case, then he lied on his declaration form, which is required by the committee. Doesn't seem to me that he was an objective witness. He was there merely as a mouthpiece of the Ankara administration.
Speaking about corruption and investigating finances, tell us something about the son-in-law of Erdogan and the money he makes all over the oil dealings he has.
So I'm not a Turkish speaker, so I haven't been able to read the 57,000 emails that were released by WikiLeaks, but I'm told by research assistants at Columbia University that they paint a pretty sordid picture of Berat's collusion with ISIS to export their oil through Turkey to Ceyhan, generating up to $3 million a day at the peak of the trade, which was critical for ISIS to sustain its operations. The fact that corruption touches the inner circle of the Erdogan administration should take no one by surprise. We all listened with amazement to the taped recordings of Tayyip and his son Bilal on December 17th of 2013, where they talked about disposing of all the illicit cash in the family residences and identified tens of millions of euros that they couldn't get rid of by the end of the day, which they ended up dumping into the acquisition of luxury apartments. So it's said that a rotting fish stinks from the head down. The corruption in Turkey is established by Tayyip Erdogan. The members of the Erdogan family are all involved. Berat is equally culpable.
You know, in one of your book readings, you've said when you have an outside party like Turkey actively stirring the pot. It's hard to have an anecdote for extremism. And when Turkey provides the money, the weapons, and the logistical support to the Islamic State, it's hard for Turkey to credibly present itself as an U.S. security partner in our stated goal of destroying the Islamic State. This is very, very powerful, and I could read more of what you've said. And you've been so clear in your criticism of Turkey. But what has been the response of Turkey to what you say?
When Tayyip Erdogan visited the Security Council, the General Assembly, in the fall of 2013, I was at a meeting with him at the Council on Foreign Relations, and he accused parties in the room, I suspect he had me in mind, as well as others, of instigating a smear campaign against Turkey. He said, you should investigate the facts. So Columbia University set up a research team in North America, in Europe, and Turkey as well. We had more than a dozen persons participating. We weren't able to be on the Turkey-Syria border, so our sourcing all came from secondary sources, but we did identify scores of credible media and eyewitness accounts documenting Turkey's collusion with ISIS, providing weapons, logistics, transport, money, and then when jihadis were wounded on the battlefield, they were shipped to hospitals in Turkey and provided free health care. Now, this occurred in a context President Obama had drawn a red line on the use of chemical weapons. When in August of 2013, chemical weapons were used in Ghouta, and the U.S. didn't respond, but instead subcontracted the job of de-weaponizing Syria to the Russians, Erdogan responded angrily and took it on himself to support jihadis, and those jihadis evolved into ISIS, and ISIS has been killing Westerners, Americans, and Turks in recent years. What we saw over the past week with the use of chemical weapons in Idlib is just a reminder that if you don't stand against the protagonists of WMD and make sure that chemical weapons are taken out of their hands, they'll continue to use it. So there's ample documentation that Erdogan was frustrated by the events and then set up in the president's office a fund to pay for support to ISIS. The support was engineered by the National Intelligence Agency. Hakan Fidan was the implementing partner. When there were press reports in Turkey about MIT's involvement, the journalists involved were silenced. John Dündar, the editor-in-chief of Cumhuriyet, was sentenced to 5 years for reporting on Turkey's weapons transfers to ISIS.
Mr. Phillips, during your distinguished career, you have worked with the United Nations, the U.S. State Department, and the Center for Strategic and International Studies. It is truly a pleasure talking with you, and maybe you can maybe make your final comments.
I have had the chance to work closely with Armenians over the years, and I respect deeply their efforts to gain greater global recognition of the Armenian genocide. We should remember that Erdogan is not Turkey, that Erdogan will someday disappear from the scenes, hopefully sooner than later. And at that juncture, the U.S. and Turkey can begin to restore their relationship, and hopefully the positive precedent that was set between Turkey and Armenia can also be rejoined, culminating in full implementation of the protocols and recognition by Turkey that the events in the early 20th century were genocide. It's only when there is truth and acknowledgement that we can have true reconciliation.
Mr. Phillips, all we can do is thank you simply and sincerely for your comments and for giving the time to talk with us. Thank you very, very much.
It's my honor to be with you again.
Thank you very much. Enjoy the day.